Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater, home of the public programs for the UCLA Film and Television Archive. My name is Paul Malcolm. I'm a programmer at the archive. Thank you all very much for coming out to the opening night of our weekend-long series, Enlightening Vision, Recent Films by Nathaniel Dorsky and Jerome Hiler. The last time Nathaniel Dorsky was here was in 2012, and this is the first time that we're presenting Jerome Hiler's work here at the Wilder. And I think we are in for a truly exceptional and exciting and replenishing cinematic experience over the next 3 days. And it is an incredible honor and pleasure to be able to do that with Nathaniel and Jerome here. So let's just please welcome them to the Wilder here right now. So running through some of the program notes, tonight we will be presenting 3 films by Jerome Hiler, and that will be followed after the films, we'll have a conversation with Jerome on stage. Tomorrow night we'll be presenting a 4-film program which features 2 works by Nathaniel Dorsky and 2 works by Jerome Hiler. And in a 4-film program, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to have 3 world premieres. So you don't want to miss that. It's going to be a very exciting night. And then on Sunday at 7 p.m., an earlier time than tonight's and tomorrow night's show, at 7 o'clock on Sunday, we'll be presenting Nathaniel Dorsky's Arboretum Cycle. You don't want to miss any of these screenings this weekend, so please come back. We hope to see you here. I want to give a huge thank you to Jerome and Nathaniel for curating this program and putting it together, and for coming down here for the whole weekend. And I want to give an extra special thank you to the real driver behind getting this whole weekend together and making it happen, Steve Anker. Steve is just a phenomenal partner to work with. And so Steve will be conducting all of our post-screening conversations over the weekend. So right now, please help me welcome to the stage, Steve Anker.
Well, I want to thank Paul Malcolm. That was very nice, what you said, but it's a two-way street, and this wouldn't be happening if he wasn't so encouraging and supportive. To be able to have 3 nights in a row in a wonderful theater like this of films by independent, experimental, so-called personal filmmakers is a rarity. And, I think that I think all of us, owe you a lot of gratitude for making this happen. And actually, the archive programs here at the Hammer have become, in I think recent time, more and more dedicated to independent film of all kind, and including what we call experimental film. And one of the other series that is ongoing is a retrospective of films by Barbara Hammer, who actually was here just a couple of weeks ago. And I mention that actually in part because, and I'm looking around and I know many of you, maybe most of you, and for myself, as I get older, as time goes on, I find myself appreciating this kind of gathering more and more. And certainly I've been involved in programming, teaching, and my ways, in different ways of being around the world of personal experimental film my whole life, but it just seems to me that it's something that is more and more special, and to use a word, well, I'll use it, that I don't use often, I would say even sacred in a certain way. As here we are, choosing to be here, seeing unusual films that are obviously not going to ever get, huge public notice, let's say, but that are so deep and so central, as far as I'm concerned, to what it means to be alive. And, I think in recent time, many filmmakers have been ill, have passed away. It's not that that hasn't always happened, but it does seem to be something that I'm more aware of. And one of the filmmakers, Nathaniel Dorsky, who, as Paul mentioned, is here with us this weekend. It's almost, I don't know what word to use now, but let's just say we're overjoyed that Nick is with us, because he had a major operation just 8 weeks ago. And I think it's his spirit, it's his love of, sharing his work and these kinds of occasions. I think that has, well, encouraged him to make the trip. Anyway, so I just think that here we are, and I think that it's just something that's very special, and I feel we're sharing something, and I think that it's very appropriate in a way, what I'm saying to what we're going to be seeing tonight, but actually over the next 2 nights as well. So, so these are 3 nights of films by Nathaniel Dorsky and Jerome Hiler, and the 2 of them have been showing their films increasingly, as I see it, with each other, or at least in proximity to each other's work. But that's never happened here, and in fact, also as Paul mentioned, I believe Jerry has never shown his films in Los Angeles, and Nathaniel hasn't done so in a long time. So this is an especially rare, I think, and a special occasion for these 3 nights. Jerome Hiler, Jerry Hiler, whose films we're about to see, is someone who is a very private individual. I'd say, I think that can be said safely as an overall description of Jerry. That said, he's also very social, passionately involved in the world, as much as anyone I've ever known. But his films have been very rarely shown publicly, at least until recent years, maybe the last 10 years, 15 years, hardly ever. He spent many years of his life, most of his life, showing work privately in small gatherings, intimate situations, works that, in a sense, were always in the process of being made. And I'd say it was only, again, maybe 20 years ago, if I'm right, that he began to show increasingly publicly. And so one of the things that's so marvelous about Jerome's work is that I think what we will share as a group, as a larger group, has an intimacy, has an immediacy, that is very much as though you're having a one-to-one conversation with him, the filmmaker. And I think each of us receives his work on a completely individual and a very personal basis. The 2 filmmakers, both Nathaniel and Jerome, only work in 16 millimeter in terms of moving imagery, and they've been doing that their entire lives, going back to the mid-early 60s. So that means for the better part of more than 50 years, they have been devoted to working pretty much with the Bolex camera, the traditional classic independent filmmaker's tool. And though each has clearly, I'd say, influenced each other's work, I would say, and they certainly stand in relation to one another's work, each's work is very distinct and distinctively different. So Jerry works in silent forms, all right? So the films we're going to see tonight are all silent, and at silent speed. It's lower original, at least closer to original speed of film in the early part of the 20th century. But even though they're silent, I'd say that Jerry's work embodies the total person, the total body, in ways in which I think only the greatest filmmakers ever can do. I think there's so much going on in every one of his films, rapturous color and incredible textures, a sense of space, sense of movement, all the things that, again, the greatest filmmakers of any media, of any genre, let's call it, have always excelled at, have been able to do brilliantly and creatively, and he does it in a very distinctive, as I say, distinctive way. I think Jerry's sense of color, and this came through to me even more than ever before when he showed the first film, you're going to see tonight, Words of Mercury, in my class on Wednesday. His color is so ravishing, and his sensitivity to color, but more than that, his ability to have colors speak so vibrantly and with such life it's uncanny. So even though he's working in silence, and even though he's working with a very, at this point, old tool, what we're going to see tonight, I think, in many ways, are the kinds of images we've never seen before. I think that they're a sense of space, a sense of movement, all these things I've been talking about, texture and color, it's as though we're seeing them, I really feel, for the first time. And a couple more thoughts, and then I'd like to turn it over to Jerry. One is that I think that he's got an ability to go so deeply, even though his work, as his words, are so direct and in a sense simple. That to me, that's a remarkable kind of combination that one rarely encounters. But to have it in the person as well as have it in an artwork, is just, can I say, it's very special. And he's an artist who, although he's remained very, let's say, individual and private in his life, has brought together so many worlds of interest and interest in the arts in general into what he creates. That it's actually wonderful. It's remarkable. I mean, Jerry has a serious background. Well, among other things, in music, classical music, going back from early music to the most avant-garde, contemporary music, let's call it, painting and poetry, serious interest in dance, and he himself, I would say, is, they use the word, a scholar of stained glass, medieval stained glass, and he himself is also a serious stained glass artist. So I think when we're watching his work, you can't think, well, that's dance-like or music, but I think that his sense of art emanating from the person, in the most genuine and non-academic ways, I just think it can be seen in every aspect of what he does and in his work. So this is, incredibly rich work. I used the word miracle the other day in my class, and then I saw the film and I said, Jesus, man, that was the right word. And I hadn't seen Words of Mercury in a number of years, and I can tell you, it's like every time I see the film, it just blows me away, and it makes me very happy to be alive and very happy to be in a situation where we can share such a thing that he's made it possible. So with all that said, I'd like to introduce Jerome Hiler.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Paul, and thank you, UCLA, Film and Television Archive. It's a pleasure to be in Los Angeles. How I love this city. I rarely come here. I only live up the coast, but I must say every time I come here, I fall in love again. I lived here briefly in the 70s, and that was a different time to live here, that's for sure. It's wonderful to be here. I can only echo a bit of what Steve was saying about the sort of specialness of what we do. I don't know if there are other filmmakers here or if there are artists here or anybody who works in some way off the grid, off the materialist grid that we call our world and our society, with all its aggression and cynicism. If we can continue our work and continue to have a heart of tenderness and gentleness and extend that to the world, that work is very important, and please continue to do it. Just want to say a word or two about our films. Words of Mercury. Words of Mercury, I made that as a sort of farewell to Ektachrome reversal film. It was a beautiful film stock, and they were discontinuing it, and I only had a few rolls left. And as I looked at that yellow box of film, I thought, somehow there are so many colors hidden in this box, unreleased colors somewhere. And it was like mining for little precious gems. And I thought the only way I could try to get the most out of these rolls would be to shoot them many times over. And so I simply shot the roll and then I shot it again and I shot it again and I shot it again, sometimes 4 times. Just because I knew that emulsion in there contained hidden colors that I wanted to see if they were down in there. And sometimes they were disasters and everything was, a mess, and then other times things turned out well. But as such, it's a very imprecise film because most of the transformation that took place inside the black box, the Bolex, outside my ability to remember what was underneath exactly, and so forth and so on. So a lot of the work that was done by the Bolex. A lot of the work that was done by our chemists and chemicals and so forth and so on. I did my part, but there were a lot of other elements in there that were beyond my control, and it turned out well. The Bolex, and since I had to keep the film sometimes in there a month while I was reshooting it, the Bolex turned into almost a distillery, churning out some kind of transformed product. The reading of the film is up to you. I would just say don't read the film. It's a film completely for your mind. You are the other part of the film. And the second film is called Bagatelle One. And it was supposed to be part of a film called Bagatelles, plural. They're short films separated by some black and so forth. But eventually the films just grew into one film that turned into a kind of my life flashing before my eyes thing. At the end of life, they say, your life flashes before your life. Maybe your laugh does too, whatever. And so their part of the film is shot in my hometown in Jamaica, and it's from the 60s, and the footage goes through to recent footage. And that's a fairly brief film. The third film is called Marginalia. It's a little darker than the other two because I was becoming more and more concerned about the state of the world's, for one thing, ecology, and there is a motif there of a father who has some sons, and he sort of shows them, he sort of teaches them things, and that was part of my only hope was that parents could teach their children, worthy things in this particular darkening age. That's about it. So we'll be coming out later on and hopefully being a little more clear.
I'd like you to just talk a little more about that, what it means to you, and
I feel like any artist or filmmaker or whatever, anybody, basically their job is to transform. I mean, we have material. We live in a material world, a world that we can see, and yet I soon understand that the only way we have to judge that world is through our senses, which are very poor, actually. Ask a dog what he thinks of our sense of smell, or even our sense of hearing, or ask a hawk what they think of our sense of sight, and you'll probably hear that they don't think very much of it. Yet, of course, we judge reality according to these very imperfect things. So I have to assume that the greater part of what is ordinary life is invisible, and that the greater part of activity is is beyond our senses, yet we can still feel these things, intuit these things, have glimpses of much larger things. And I feel that by taking material, familiar material, and transforming it, we signal to other people in a way that there are larger dimensions to our lives. I mean, isn't that what artists do, is that they signal that there are larger dimensions to our life? And so that's what I feel like, that's the joy of filmmaking to me, is the camera can capture recognizable sights, and just the fact that it's taken out of context, so to speak, right then and there, there's something magical about it. As a child, I thought there was something completely magical about what were called home movies. I think some of us are old enough to remember what home movies were, but I'm still enamored of that. I'm more enamored at the idea of making home movies than I am of being a avant-garde artist or someone like that. It's my love is actually just that transformative power, that bringing an image, most often shot in the daytime, home and showing it at night, having it on the wall at night. I still have a sort of a childhood kick out of seeing that. So taking an image out of context automatically is, of course, transformative.
Okay, but we will, of course, never know what it is to be able to smell like a dog or see like a hawk. But on the other hand, what you do in your work is you take what we can do with our vision, at least, and go into it so intensely and in such a way, in so many ways that can, that we can make sense of as human beings, right? But in ways in which we don't normally see, and we wouldn't normally see any of these things, of course. And so your work is transformative because it is allowing us and actually giving us an ability to see in ways which we've never done, but actually to take the familiar and defamiliarize it, but give it so many different associative values and meanings, right? And so that's it seems to me, such a human thing, and and such an artful thing, and especially, you're using, as you spoke about at the beginning, this little box, which is what it is. It's just a box through which, by comparison to what we have today, primitive, right? A box through which film travels and is exposed, and yet you're doing things that, again, are magical, and I'd say, I used the word earlier, miraculous. I think they are.
Well, they are all those things, and I mean, I'm not taking credit for it. They're there. They're possible in the film. That's why I do it, because I'm aware that they're possible, and I'm delighted when things come out the way I like to see them. But people have been superimposing for ages and ages.
Not like that.
Well, not like that, but
Brakhage was pretty good at it, and Stan Brakhage was pretty good at it. We could think of other filmmakers.
And of course, Stan Brakhage was an inspiration to me. One of the filmmakers I saw around 1960, 61, as a 19-year-old, and I thought, I want to do this. I want to not superimpose, but I want to have colors sink into. Stan would have a color red, and it would seep into past my eyes into my brain in such a way that I had never quite experienced that before in a painting. It was that sort of that alignment of light and color was a knockout. And sure, that was an inspiration to make films.
But just to stay with the word for another minute, I
Sure.
think that, and I've only thought about this tonight, perhaps the more evident, I want to say obvious, more evident transformations are multiple layers and amazing ways in which you're able to work with that phenomenon. But it also is the way that after an extended passage of that kind of imagery, then you'll cut to a quiet shot, which is simply of itself. And those images, I know what they are, but they suddenly, I don't know, they seem to have as much of a sense of form as anything else. And to me, that's amazing. Because they are, you've allowed them to, at that moment, be simply what they are, but they resonate in ways that they would never otherwise, probably.
Well, that's true. I mean, I think that's just my musical side coming out. That I feel like you can't keep floating around and floating around. You have to land every once in a while, and that's the purpose of these shots that just are stills that we see a sort of a familiar scene, and yes, it's a kind of a musical relief from being set adrift. You don't want to be too set adrift, constantly floating around, and at the same time, it's that kind of thing of like waking up. We very important times during your day where you wake up, that you've been lost in some kind of dreams and lost in some kind of thoughts and fantasies, or just lost in some kind of inattention. It's amazing the various states we're in during the day. I don't even know what to call them, but there are degrees and degrees, and then all of a sudden, snap, you're awake. You suddenly see the street. You suddenly see where you are, and you go, "Whoa!" I didn't even know I'm having this experience now driving where we're here already. Where have I been? I've been, driving safely and so forth, but I feel suddenly I'm at something. That's a bit of what those shots also represent, this kind of waking up from a certain state of mind into a bigger state of mind.
Okay. And
The bigger state of mind is just the ordinary thing.
one level of your work, or a sense of your work that I had more here tonight, more fully than I've ever had. And it's another kind of transformation, is your sense of, it's not so much time as much as gradual movement, graduation, so to speak, gradual moving from moment to moment. And it's a kind of it's a sensibility, and it's very distinctive. And it's through all the work. It's hard, I think, to talk about. Your work is so ephemeral. It's about that. But I think this is something where every moment feels gradual, and yet, as you're experiencing it, inevitable. And yet, I find myself with your work from moment to moment in a way which is rare. So it's, and again, I think it in a way it kind of transcends technique, or at least it absorbs technique.
It's a little like a runaway animal, but a runaway animal that isn't very fast. I don't control things that well. I just kind of corral. I corral the film, and I'm always surprised at the things that are happening. So many things happen beyond my intention, and things just happen that way. As I say, there are so many aspects to making a film, and so many things that are done not by me, and that I just try my best to arrange my main job is, after all the footage is shot, of course, is to try to put it into a musical
Well,
form.
you said something comparable the other day, and I find that very paradoxical.
Well, it wouldn't be the truth if it wasn't
Well,
paradoxical.
fine, but fair enough. But there are things happening that are so amazing, layerings and articulations within frames, and then of course from
I'm as
section to
surprised
section.
as you when I
You
see
may be
those.
surprised, but it didn't happen by accident. And it's not just corral. I mean, okay, this is my take. If you're corralling because you're in full, how do I say, awareness, if not control, and maybe more of that than you're letting on of what you're doing. And I think that, it is amazing. I mean, I'm not pretending or suggesting that you could be in control of how many layers? 4 or 5?
Yeah.
What's the max?
Yeah.
What an event. On the other hand, when suddenly a horizontal color appears,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
any number of examples, these are articulations which are results of,
True.
of tremendous
Intention.
knowledge and awareness of what you're doing.
Well, it's true, but at the same time, I'm not trying to sound modest here. I'm just pointing out that there were a lot of roles that did not turn out well at all, and there were a lot of roles that I overexposed, and there were a lot of roles where I put a lot of work into, and then they just came out lousy, and those things kind of sharpen your intention to do better, and so.
You say you've been working, at least I've heard you say that you were working in this mode that is with multiple exposures for a long time.
Yes.
Okay, and over this time, you have seen yourself become more and more, let's just say, if not in control again, being able to shape things more? Now, that's a question, but it seems to me kind of like...
Well, I think I said it before,
Yeah.
that it's more the sense of something coming to an end. This idea that this was the end of film. And I basically, as you can see from Bagatelle 2, which contains a lot of old footage, I wasn't always superimposing. There's just regular footage. But, and I've tried occasionally to superimpose in the camera, and there would always be some shots that would be too bright, too overexposed, and they would ruin all the other layers. And so many times I swore it off forever. I was never going to do this again. I was never going to waste my time. But then there it was, the end of Ectochrome. They weren't going to make it anymore. And so that gave me the determination to make it happen.
I want to bring up the word patience. You said that earlier that sometimes the rolls would be in your camera for months.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, sure. What is that? I mean,
well, I'm not. You see, the thing is that the situations don't present themselves to you. You can't just shoot. You have to have a certain kind of an image. You have to have a lot of black in the image, or you can't pile up the layers. If you shoot 3 or 4 layers on a bright afternoon and out on Wilshire Boulevard, you're going to get a white image. Just so you have to choose your images very carefully, and they don't come along. Every once in a while, I'll see a black wall, and I'll go, whoa, a black wall. I mean, that'll be so exciting for me because it means that I can have a little bit of blackness, which is like gold. And so I'll see some little dandelions growing at the bottom of a black wall, and I'll run the camera down among the dandelions, and you saw them there in Words of Mercury jumping around those yellow flowers. That was because I spotted a black wall. But you don't see those things every day. So time passes, and frustration builds. And sometimes that's when you make your mistakes, when you're sick and tired of having this roll of film in the camera, and you might make a mistake. Should we open it to? Oh.
So you've studied and made stained glass, and you've painted, at least a while ago, from what I remember, but certainly studied painting. And I think you seem to have an uncanny facility at being able to see things in multiple ways. That is to say, formally as well as, I mean, great filmmakers do this, but I think you really do have an uncanny ability to do that, and then to be able to embody that in the work. But it just knocks me out how you can hover between those two. Again, even on given the way you edit, as simply as a straightforward image, but certainly when you're doing things on more complex visual levels.
Well, I feel like I'm a hybrid, and that I sometimes feel like I'm not really. I can't really call myself a filmmaker. Sometimes I feel like I'm a painter with the camera, and then sometimes I feel like I really want to be a musician, and so I don't exactly know where my films belong in a way, but that's how I feel. I feel like it's a visual art, almost like I feel like more like I'm a painter with the camera, and put things together as a musician, and it's not what a lot of people do with film. And I sometimes wonder, am I a filmmaker or am I some kind of hybrid that doesn't even have a name?
Okay, one more thing, and then I think there are people here.
I'm happy to open
But
up to the
I
audience.
want to ask one more thing, which is just about the titles, because I think your titles are very evocative. So, Words of Mercury. Can you just say a word about the Words of Mercury?
Well, then you see, by telling you about Words of Mercury,
You don't have to explain it.
I would then explain that I'd have to talk about what I thought the film was about, and I didn't want to do that. But basically, I'm 75. I'm at the end of my life, and the Words of Mercury is those words. That phrase comes from the last two lines of Love's Labour's Lost, where in the play it's a kind of a comedy, and everyone was having a really good time, and things got really rollicking at one point, and it got very funny. And then somebody was standing over there very grimly wearing black, and you realized, oh, well, come on in, what are you, who are you, what do you have to, and he told one of the women that her father was dead. Her father was the king of France. So they realized that instead of having the courtships that they were all planning to have, that they had to go into mourning for 2 years. And they all sort of made plans to get together and so forth, and that was the end of all their fun. And one of the characters, the fantastical Don Armado of a Spanishman, turns to the audience and he says, "The words of Mercury are harsh after the songs of Apollo. You that way, we this way." And that was the abrupt ending to the play. And to me, that little truck that we see in the distance in the blue at the end of Words of Mercury, to me, that's another soul that has slipped away suddenly in the night, while all this kind of riot of color and which had built up from a kind of stark winter and into a almost sickly rich opulence, and then suddenly something slips away. So that's why I refer to it as Words of Mercury.
And Bagatelle?
Bagatelle just means that it's a small, insignificant thing, and as I said, it was supposed to be a series of small vignettes that sort of managed to coalesce into one thing. And Manohla Dargis said in the Times that it was something misnamed film, but it was supposedly, it was conceived as a sort of a short little thing.
And a lot of that material was filmed?
That was filmed from my earliest experience as a filmmaker. The trains were in my local town of Jamaica, Queens, where I grew up. Me and our president grew up in the same town.
One of you turned into something good. And what about Marginalia?
Marginalia, of course, has more of a feeling of alienation about it, I'd say. Because sometimes I feel that way. I feel alienated, and so when I think of my visions or the things I have to say as being more marginalia than the main text, and
It didn't feel marginal. Those are
that kind
amazing
of a thing.
uses of scratches, and we're again,
Well,
your
the
way
scratches the scratches sort of stand in for the kind of cursive writing that one makes in marginal comments. So that's what all that scratching and marginalia is about. And there are things at the end where you see letters like A's and D's and B's, and I was sort of getting into this idea of, I was remembering when one learned how to write and how sort of vaguely traumatizing it was to have to write A's again and again and again. And I did it on a little blackboard, and I think I did that because I had just heard that some educators were planning not on teaching cursive writing anymore.
It's not just some; it's a big issue now.
Yeah. So those are the titles. If anybody has, yes.
Was that Ann Waldman in that black and white footage?
Yes.
Yeah. Thought so. And who was the young woman talking to Nick?
That's Ann too.
That's Ann too. She's
Yes.
different. Okay.
She's my ongoing movie star through a number of movies. Yes, gentlemen.
Especially in the first and third film, I had a sense, at least some of the time, of passages that lasted about 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and I wondered to what extent you took roles that just worked and put them in as objects, and to what extent you mined them further for material.
I didn't hear. Excuse me. I didn't understand the last phrase.
To what extent you were putting roles that worked intact into the films, and to what extent you are mining them further for material, editing material out of the roles that are superimposed.
Well, I don't believe I have any complete roles up there. It was a coincidence, I guess, that it was. I guess it's. I guess I've gotten very used to the phraseology of the 100-foot roll. So even when I have my choice, I feel like that's enough, et cetera, I would like to point out my technique for fading, by the way, which is, a lot of fade and fade out. I use a fabric dye mixed with water in a jar, and I submerge the film frame by frame, first slow, and then faster and faster and faster, and then quickly squeegee it off. So most of the dissolves and fades you saw in there were done in that manner. And they help a lot to give the impression that you're seeing something continuous. But their real purpose was to hide the fact that it's all cement spliced reversal film. And this is not A and B rolled. None of my films were ever A and B rolled and planned out. This is all a single strip of film, and all the superimpositions were shot in the camera. So I cement splice everything, and those splices can or might be visible. So I either cut into black, or I'll cover it over with one of my liquid fades. Yes? Oh, sorry.
Yes, the first film, Words of Mercury, there was an image where at first it looked like veins, white veins were crawling up the screen, and then it was very flat, and then I realized it was actually trees you were shining a light.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Were you aware that it resembled like electrical impulses going through the neurons of a brain?
Yes.
It was
Well, you see, film is just so wonderful. You know, film is just wonderful. Just let it do its thing. You know, it wants to do some kind of wonderful things. Where does it take place? Does it take place outside? Could you say parts of Words of Mercury were exterior, or was it some kind of interior space? I don't even know what the location of the film is. You know, but I do know that I was driving home one night, and there was a disco club opening, and they had those searchlights outside trying to make a fuss about their opening. And I thought, I gotta go home and get the camera. So I went home and shot the trees under the, Hotsy Totsy Club, outside the Hotsy Totsy Club. There's someone here.
Thank you for showing your film here.
Believe me, thank you for coming, and thank again the UCLA Film and Television Archive.
I was curious to know about your filming process.
Sure.
There's definitely, it's a silent film, but I felt like there was a musical quality about the way you're filming and the way you're editing. What do you hear when you watch these films?
What do I hear?
Yeah.
Usually sometimes somebody puts up going, sir, why are you shooting with that camera? Which I did hear one time. I was trying to shoot something and someone's going, excuse me, why are you using that camera? I don't know if I'm hearing something, but I'm definitely dancing sometimes and shooting the camera. Funny thing about making films, you have to do everything. You have to be a musician, you have to be a dancer, you have to be a painter, a lot of different things. But I guess I don't think so much about what I'm hearing. Do you mean that metaphorically, or am I thinking of a tune or something like that?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious, like, when you watch your films, are you hearing something?
Oh, when I watch my films?
Yeah, when you watch it.
Oh, no. No. I mean, in other words, if you go to, see, again, I have to say this hybrid thing. If you go to a gallery and you look at a painting, do you necessarily hear music when you're looking at the painting?
I think I do.
You do, good.
Yeah.
I'm not against it at all. I'm hounded by tunes. As a matter of fact, I have to be very careful in the morning, not to in the shower, not to hum anything too trashy, because once it's like some kind of like the alien or something, when it grabs a hold of you and it won't leave you for the whole day. So I have to be very careful. I get tunes that definitely sort of attach themselves to my nervous system. But no, not. I love music. I'm more interested in music sometimes, I think, than I am in film or anything else. Sometimes I don't know what I'm most interested in, but music is really big. And yet at the same time, when I'm shooting on the visual thing, I'm just focusing on that. I'm not thinking of music at that point. Up in the back. Oh, Paul Malcolm.
Thank you again, Jerome, for showing your films here.
Sure, thank
they're
you,
just
Paul.
really beautiful. I agree with Steve. Miraculous is definitely a word that I would use to describe them in my experience of them. But something you said in your introduction struck me. and then sort of resonated with me throughout the films when I was watching them. You talked about the importance of having artists working outside of the commercial realm, artists with a personal vision, but you also talked about the importance of artists working with gentleness, and that word just really resonated with me. And with the films, it's a quality that I think I could use more in my own life, my own behavior, but throughout society at every level, this gentleness is not a word you hear a lot these days. Could you talk about what it means to you to work with gentleness and how that informs your practice and the imagery on screen?
Yes, I don't know if I said gentleman or tenderness, gentleness. Yeah, it's a doorway. To me, gentleness is a doorway to enlightenment, as it were. You start. What is gentleness? Gentleness is actually when you put your hand down on the side of the chair. There, you actually feel it. You feel your world, and gentleness is also a thing of extending love to yourself first. Then that automatically goes bouncing out to others. So gentleness is the way that we can be loving to ourselves. And that's the most important thing. I'm not talking about any kind of selfishness or narcissism here. I'm talking about appreciation, having a sense of appreciation for the miracle of being alive. I mean, it's amazing. We are sitting in an auditorium and with the long lights over us, and we don't know. We really don't know how the hell did this happen. How did this happen? That in this whole, you've seen the Hubble pictures, you've seen the rest of the universe. How the heck did this happen? They can't find anything on another planet unless they're hiding, and there's a theory about that. But the point is, this is an amazing thing. Even if you say, oh, it's a terrible mistake, it's not a terrible mistake. It's utterly amazing, and you know it's beautiful. I mean, the beauty is everywhere. And yet at the same time, so is ugliness. It's a big mixture. And through gentleness, I think we can open ourselves to accept the whole thing, accept the ugliness mixed with the gentleness that is our world. And at that point, that sense of love, we could extend a little love to it and say to somebody, hey, take it easy. It's okay. It's not that bad. Really. You're going a little too, and not to in any way endorse the cynicism and cruelty that seems to be at the high watermark all around us. So the doorway to the whole thing is gentleness, tenderness, leads to love for yourself, love to others, etc. And maybe your art can express that too.
Who wants to speak anything after that? Questions? Anyone else?
Hi, thank you. Your films made me think of the images, the kind of images you produce when you're reading, and I was just wondering, what do you read?
What do I read? Well, I'm not an educated person, so I'm having a kind of a cram.
It means he doesn't have a piece of paper.
Cramming to get sort of classics down, like I've read Don Quixote in the summertime, I'm trying to get all these things that an educated person really should get. I'm reading all the Shakespeare plays several times now. Right now I'm having a fantastic time with a book called Ninth Street Women. Anybody hear of this one? Well, if anybody knows anything about the abstract expressionist movement, it's about Grace Hardigan, Elaine de Kooning, Lee Krasner, Joan Mitchell, and Helen Frankenthaler. And it begins in the 1930s and ends in 1959. Thick book, fabulous, so exciting, so interesting. I mean, a page turner. You'd be on the edge of your seat reading about the abstract expressionist movement from the point of view of the women that were in it, who were trying not to be Mrs. Jackson Pollock and Mrs. Elaine de Kooning, Mrs. Bill de Kooning, et cetera, et cetera. It's a fascinating book. It's also a sort of a feminist view of the 40s and 50s, and it's a wonderful book on art, and I think anybody would be interested in it. It's a very exciting book.
Thanks.
I read a chapter a night out loud to Nathaniel since he's been recovering from the operation. We have a great time. Okay.
Are we done? Last question or comment? Or no? Well, thank you, Jerome Hiler.
Good.
Wonderful
Thanks.
night.